Hi everyone, in this video we are going to learn some basics of Spring AOP. AOP stands for Aspect-Oriented Programming. Now we have heard about Object-Oriented Programming, but what is Aspect-Oriented Programming? AOP is a programming style where it modularizes the concerns within our application, where concerns are actually called as the cross-cutting concerns. Let me explain a bit more on the cross-cutting concerns. In the application, we write business code and other supporting code like logging, transaction management, caching, security, etc. All these are written around the actual business code, and these are called as cross-cutting concerns, as they cut over the actual business code, or you can call it as production code. So what AOP helps us is, separating out this logic, that is the concerns, and put it into a separate module, and hence, modularizing the concern. And that style is called as AOP. I hope you got the definition of aspect-oriented programming. Now, AOP has many implementations and written in different languages like Java, .NET, JavaScript, etc. And Spring AOP is also an implementation of the actual AOP. It is not the complete implementation, but it has, most of the feature covered, which are used to take care of most of the concerns that we come across when developing our application. Now, Spring AOP tries to use the same concept that we have in the AOP. Okay, so let's look at those key concepts so that it becomes easy for us to understand and also implement Spring AOP in our application. So let's take a look at all those concepts. First we have is aspect. Now, aspect is a class containing code specific to a cross-cutting concern. You can also call aspect as an area, okay, where you have all the logic related to a particular concern. Now, when you separate out for example, if you're trying to separate out the logging logic from your business code and you put it into a module, okay, and that module, now you call it as an aspect, okay, because now you have all the logic within that class related to your concern, that is logging concern, okay. And if you in a Spring AOP you annotate that class with aspect, that becomes aspect annotation, then that becomes an aspect, okay. So next we have is join point. Now, a join point is a point during the execution of a program where aspect behavior and the base behavior join. Now, aspect behavior, I'm referring it to the method within the aspect class, whereas the base behavior is a reference to the target method, okay, where our actual business code resides, okay. And this might be a little confusing. It might sound a little confusing, like a point during the execution of a program where the aspect behavior, that is the aspect method, and the target method join. But for now you can just make a mental note of the definition. But if you try to visualize, or if you're trying to implement this concept, you will get the actual definition of what a join point is, okay. So next we have is advice. Now, advice is an action that is taken by the aspect at a join point, okay. Now, you can call this as an aspect behavior, and the behavior will have a lot of logic, right? And particularly that those will be actions that you take when a join point is executed, right? So we have different types of advices. We have before advice, which will be executed before the join point, Okay, to make it more simple to understand, before advice will be executed before the execution of the base behavior. Okay, then we have after return, and this will be executed after a join point execution completes normally without an exception. Okay, if an exception was thrown by the base behavior, then the after return will not be executed. Okay, so after return advice will be executed only when the base behavior completes successfully. Then we have after throw. This will be executed only after, only after there was an exception thrown by the base behavior. Okay, if the base behavior completed successfully, then after throw advice will not be executed. So this can be used, basically for error handling. Then we have after advice, similar to what we have before. This will be executed after the join point execution, no matter how the execution ended. That means if the base behavior completed successfully or there was an exception thrown, in either case, the after advice will be executed. Then we have around advice. This is more powerful advice and can be used to perform action before and after execution of a join point. Okay, this can also be used to modify the return value of the base behavior, and it can also be used to control the flow of the execution. Okay, and that makes around advice more powerful than any other advice that we have. Okay, and you'll find this advice used more commonly when we are using Spring AOP in our application. Then we have PointCut. Now PointCut is a predicate used to identify join points. It is basically an expression that matches a join point execution. Now what you do is, you want to apply advice for a particular expression, means for all the classes within a package. Okay, or I would say all the classes within a package and sub packages apply this advice when a certain condition is matched or met, right? So that expression or predicate we can give using PointCut. Okay, so the next we have is AOP proxy. Now AOP uses a concept of proxy, like what it is. I mean, whenever you are trying to create an aspect, okay, for a particular concern for a target object, what AOP does is it creates a proxy object. Rather than using directly the target object, what it does is it extends the target object. So what it does, so that it inherits all the behaviors from the target object, and now any request that is being made, that goes to the proxy object rather than to the target object. Okay, so there are two ways the AOP, the Spring AOP creates the proxy object. One is the JDK dynamic proxies. These are the APIs that comes within the JDK. The condition is, the classes, that is the target object, must implement the interface. And the other way of creating the proxy object is using CCLib. Okay, this is a library that is, that you can find in your class path when using AOP. And the condition is your target object extends a class. Okay, so by default, Spring AOP uses JDK dynamic proxies to create the proxy objects. Okay, this is something that you need to theoretically remember it, because if there is anything that you see in the logs, you will see the proxy objects. For example, if you are trying to expect the exception handling. Okay, and you are using after throwing advice. So if you try to log the trace, you will see the proxy objects in your in the trace. So you need to know that, okay, there is JDK dynamic proxies or CCLib being used, and that is how the the AOP uses the concept of proxies by creating the proxy object that is actually the child class, or you can say that inherits from the target object. Okay, so all the requests that are made are on the proxy rather than directly to the target object. This is something that if you're trying to do certification, right, Spring certification, this goes in detail with the concept of AOP and also the combinations of this before, after, all these advices. Okay, but if you are if you know the basic definitions of this different concepts here, then it's well and good, and we can implement Spring AOP in our application. Okay, so I hope you are now familiar with Spring AOP and the key concepts in the aspect-oriented programming. So that's all for this video, and I'll see you in the next session.